Last week we talked about gratitude to our forebears, and this week I would like to talk about gratitude for our veterans, because Tuesday is Veterans Day, and that's a time that the country has set aside to acknowledge gratitude for those who have stepped forward to serve, to help protect our way of life and protect our country. So I want to share two stories that have actually touched me. One is about Staff Sergeant Stacy Pearsall, who was a U.S. Air Force retired staff sergeant. So Stacy came from a family of people who have served in the military. And at age 17, she joined the Air Force with an intention of being an artist, thinking that she could combine her talent for art and also serve the country. However, life had a way of stepping forward for her, and her plans for service went askew, in that there were no opportunities for her to be an artist. However, she was called to be a photographer. And so she went to photography school through the military, and she ultimately traveled to 41 countries. She was one of two women who received the Outstanding Military Photography Award given by the National Press Photographers Association. And she was called to Baghdad, and she was very young. And so she had an opportunity, or had the chore or the duty, whichever way you want to express that, of taking some photographs that spoke of the humanity of the military amid all of the really disastrous, difficult things. Early on, she was in an open vehicle which was bombed, and she was blown out and had a neck injury. And so she because she was one of the few women at that time who was on the front lines, she thought that she better just suck it up. And so for several years, she moved around and was taking medication and just living with the pain. And then sometime later, she was again near Baghdad when, because it was a multi-purpose sort of job, she was manning a machine gun and a transport, and someone signaled that there was an injured person on the road. So she went down to help get this injured man up onto the transport, and in the process of that, she fell once more and injured her neck again, and just decided to live with the pain. And ultimately, she was sent to the hospital and then transported to South Carolina, where it was discovered that she had broken her neck a couple of times, and it was starting to fuse by nature. And the doctor said if she had had another fall, that she would have been paralyzed for the rest of her life. But in all of that transition, she was feeling as though her purpose was being fulfilled, that she was being called by God to take the photographs of the humanity of the military soldiers that she encountered. Well, as she was in the hospital for the neck problem, she became more and more distraught and ultimately was diagnosed with PTSD. And because she felt that her life's purpose was not being fulfilled, then she moved into a deep level of depression and had considered suicide, and was so close to running her car into an embankment that only some power that spoke to her reminded her of how upset her family and her husband would be. Because of that, then, she was in therapy and was given a discharge. So she moved from being in active duty and being in a hospital of active duty to being in the VA hospital. And when she was in the VA hospital, she was sitting there with a bunch of old men, interesting old men. And one guy said to her, "Well, did you bring your daddy to the hospital, honey?" And she said, no, that she was the vet. And as they were talking, she was moved by the face of this man. And she thanked him for his military service, and he thanked her for her military service. And she, at that moment, thought, wow, this is a beautiful face with so much character. And she wished that she had had the camera with her. And from that moment, her new purpose unfolded. And she started photographing veterans. And ultimately, that became her new career and her new purpose. She was awarded and appreciated by the president, and she started, let me see if I can find the exact words, the Veterans Photo Project. And so in VA hospital all across the country, her photos are displayed of veterans. She received a Bronze Star, and she has made this Veterans Photo Project her new life work. And also, she travels and she talks with veterans about her PTSD and about the treatment that she has received, encouraging them to understand that they are not alone, that is not a weakness to say, this is really a difficult circumstance. So she has taken her career from art through photography into being a photographer of veterans through the Veterans Photo Project, being recognized several times, and also being an example for allowing herself to be vulnerable enough to say, I needed help, and talking with veterans throughout the country on that basis. So, to me, she is someone that I can feel grateful for, that I can be in gratitude for. This next example of a veteran is I want to make sure that I say this correctly. A Belgian Malinois, which is like a super dog, a giant German Shepherd. D-Doc is its name. And D-Doc was trained specifically to be a war dog. And he was trained to sweep for mines. He was trained to sweep through buildings and clear buildings. And the woman who finally ended up with him was a woman who was also in the military, and she is, I don't see her name here, and I could fuddle through papers and tell you. Oh, Chloe Wells. She's a behavioral health therapist at Fort Bragg. And she ran into D-Doc because D-Doc had been adopted by a family, and the family couldn't manage him. So she adopted him briefly. Supposedly she was just going to take him until they could find another home for him because he was such a nervous dog. And there was a family that felt a little uneasy about his nerves. So the first day she had him, there was a big artillery boom, and he went on patrol. He started looking and clearing, and was on guard, could not rest. He was absolutely in action. So the next day, Chloe called his manager, who was in Afghanistan, Mike, to see what had happened. And so D-Doc was suffering from PTSD. He and his handler, Mike, had been in an artillery blast, and D-Doc had dragged Mike into a ditch and stood guard over him and would not allow him to return fire. Stood guard over him all night, and then when the light came and they went back to base, D-Doc went under the bed and would not come out, could not come out. He was suffering from PTSD also. So Chloe and her husband had two other dogs, And D-Doc was not having any interaction with anyone except Chloe. And he would stay right by her leg and would not go anywhere except where she was. And the only time he could find peace was when they were out running. And so she would run him and run him and run him. And then he would come back and be on guard. So ultimately she got him some antidepressants and some medication, which seemed to help a lot. And then one day they had a service or a ceremony to acknowledge a sculpture of service dogs. And she decided that she would try to take him to this service. And she said to him, okay, we're going to go to this service, and if you get nervous, D-Doc, we'll leave. There were other dogs there, there were other handlers there. And he stood and stayed on the outskirts of the crowd. And then gradually, he began moving in. Began seeing other dogs. Began relaxing. And then he sat next to the sculpture of a dog that looked just like him. So now he was beginning to heal and beginning to move out into the world. He started interacting with the other dogs in the family. He started interacting with the husband. He began to allow himself to move away from her to some degree. And then she started taking him to work with her, where she was meeting with and treating military personnel who were suffering from PTSD. So he is training now to be a therapy dog, to be a healer. So he also has allowed himself to be called to a different service, from being a military dog to being a therapy dog. So I think we can all agree that war is an ugly, terrible thing. And yet, there are so many people in this country who have been willing to step up and step in to service to this country. And so today is a day to be grateful for their willingness to do the jobs that are so difficult to do on behalf of each one of us. I'd like to just finish with a writing from Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of our philosophy. And he wrote this in 1940, around the 1940s. But I think it's so pertinent now, and I'd like to share it with you. he says that believing in the divine destiny of the United States of America and the preservation of liberty, security, and self-expression of all, I offer this prayer for my country. And I quote, I know that divine intelligence governs the destiny of the United States of America, directing the thought and the activity of all who guide its affairs. I know that success, prosperity, and happiness are the gifts of freedom and are the divine heritage of everyone. I know that success, prosperity, and happiness are now operating in the affairs of every individual. I know that divine guidance enlightens the collective mind of the people of this country, causing it to know that economic security may come to all without the loss of either personal freedom or individual self-expression. I know that no one can believe or be led to believe that freedom must be surrendered in order to ensure economic security for all. The all-knowing mind of God contains the answer to every problem which confronts this country. I know that every leader is now directed by this all-knowing mind and has the knowledge of a complete solution to every problem. Each is compelled to act upon this knowledge to the end that abundance, security, and peace shall come to all. And I know that this spiritual democracy shall endure, guaranteeing to everyone personal liberty, happiness, and self-expression. And so it is. So I would invite our practitioners to stand and join with me as we hold the consciousness. I want to remind you that we have this prayer box over here, so if there's a challenge that you are exploring or that you have, or that there's something wonderful that you'd like to celebrate in your life, just reminding you to leave a prayer request, and the practitioners will hold you in consciousness as well as me during the week. So join me as we just acknowledge there is one power, one force, one source, one divine essence that I call God. Spirit, the divine creative essence, the initial thought, the I am. It is everywhere present. It is peace. And I call forth the understanding of that peace. I allow myself to be peace. I know that divine essence lives and moves and has its being through 7 billion people on this planet. Each one is a part of me. And I am a part of each one. And I call forth on the deepest level a recognition of that. I allow myself to know that there are 7 billion ideas of what life should look like, what life should feel like, how life should be expressed. And I permit myself to honor and respect all of those points of view. because they are divinely directed, divinely guided. And the one right, the one correct, the one essential essence is that one. And I know that one as love. And I call it forth for each of my brethren, each of my sisters, each that is traveling the path to wholeness along with me. I permit myself to keep my heart open to be in gratitude for all of the good that is shared through that divine idea, through that divine love. And so I judge it all good. I judge it all peaceful. I judge it all divine. And I celebrate that by saying, and so it is.